back. I'm so excited that you're still with me because now we're going to get to be able to roll up our sleeves and get into some real Node Express stuff. And in order to move forward, we have to have a way, in order to persist the information that we're storing better than we currently did. Currently, we were using arrays to store the information, and every time we did a post and then changed our code base, all that information in the array would get wiped out. It would not persist. And so what we need to do before we can move forward is we need to build ourselves a couple tables, and that means we need to get into the topic of building a database. Now, the database that we're going to be using is called SQlite. Don't let the name light and SQlite concern you. It is a powerful little database, certainly good enough for small to medium-sized businesses. It's certainly not an enterprise level database. For large companies, then they use some of these options here. But it's certainly more than adequate for our needs and for a lot of the web apps that are being developed out there now. I believe even the Python language comes canned with SQlite. So it's certainly going to work good. And the SQL, the structured query language that it uses, is nearly identical to these as well. So the point of these tutorials is not to make you a relational, database expert, but we do need to know a little bit. We need to know enough about it. So I encourage you to go to the w3schools.com/SQL course. It's free and it's really a good course. You can go right to it and you can start, and it'll teach you the basic, your very first SQL line, and it moves and it progresses in a very good manner, and you'll work your way through these lessons, and after that, you should have a pretty good foundation of structured query language. It's not required to move on, but it certainly will help you as we get into creating JavaScript, where now we're writing JavaScript SQL code. So there's a library that we're going to use called Knex, which enables us to write SQL queries in JavaScript. And so the more familiarity you have with SQL and tables and how they relate to each other in general, the better, and I think the easier it'll be for you. Okay, so our project that we have before us, we're going to just create two basic tables. We're going to create a lessons table and a messages table. Now the lessons table, each lesson has an ID and it has a name. And we're going to put a constraint that the name cannot be null, because you can't have a lesson that doesn't have any name. And we're going to create a couple timestamps, the date created, and then another time for any time information on that record is changed. The ID is going to automatically be taken care of for us, and when we get to the code, I'll show you how that works. Then we're going to have another table called messages, which allows us to make a message about a lesson. Why don't we just stick this up in the same one table? Well, what if we want many messages about one lesson? That would be very cumbersome down here. So let's say there's like an ongoing message conversation about one particular lesson. So we're going to create a messages table, and each message will have its own ID. Every record that has its own ID, that's called the primary key. And each message will have a sender, a person who sends the message. We're going to put a constraint that it can't be blank. And then there's going to be the body of the message, which we're going to call text. And we're going to say that can't be blank. And then we're going to have a couple timestamps. When was the message created, or if it was edited. And then we're going to have this thing called a foreign key. So a foreign key is what links it to the lesson that it's concerned with. If I type in here, let's say I'm going to type in here, let's say I'm going to make an input of a lesson. I'm going to say a lesson, and the name is Node Beginning, and there's a time. And let's say I enter another lesson, and and then that's going to be node intermediate. And then I enter another one, and then node advanced. Well, so far we kind of did this with our arrays. Let's say now we want to make a message about one of those lessons. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to enter, let's say we want to make a message about this one over here, our advanced node lesson. So we're going to make a message. So it's the first message, and that's going to get its own ID of number 1. The sender will be me, and the text will be have to remember to set up server first. I don't know, some kind of message before recording lesson. I don't know, something like that. And then the timestamp will be the day that I type this message, and then the lesson ID. This is what will link it to one of these messages. What happens is the foreign key will stick the ID number of the lesson that it's talking about, which is this one right here. So we will stick the ID of 3 in there, and that lets us know that this message is about this one over here. And we can enter many more messages about this one or this one or this one, but the deal is you can have a message. Let's say I wanted to enter a message, which would be 2, and the sender would be me again, and I type just another message, and then let's say I put 4. Well, there is no 4th lesson over here, so this can't occur. What will happen is SQlite will not allow us to have this. It's a relationship that doesn't exist, and so I will show you how all that works in code. And so without further ado, I know these are a lot of words. Let's go create a new repo and set up a server real quick, and then I'll show you how to create those tables. So we're going to do new repo. I will say node express db tutorial, and I will initialize it with a readme, so we can clone it. And then I will do that. And now we have an empty repo with just a readme. We'll clone it here. Go to my terminal. And so let me see what I got in there. We'll see cd into the node directory. What do I got here? I'll make a directory called node db tutorial and cd into it, node db tutorial, and then this is where I'll stick that repo. So git clone and insert that right there. And so now I'm going to cd into that. So cd node express db tutorial, and then let's open up that. Okay, so now we have our empty repo. So now the first thing that we're going to do, what is the first thing we do? We are going to set up our server. So we're first thing I'm going to do is bring up a terminal here, and I am going to create a gitignore file, because I hate it when it says you have 5 million changes that you haven't. So to create a gitignore, I go npx gitignore node. Whatever you specify here is the type of gitignore file it'll create for you. If you're doing Python, then you can do Python. If you're doing, but we want it to set up for us a basic node gitignore. So I'll hit that. And then after that, we're going to create ourselves a let me see, we got a gitignore. Now we want to create a package.json file. So we do npm init-y, and that'll give us a package.json. So now we have a package.json file. Let's go look at that. That's cool. Now let's add our node mon. Remember we did the node mon so we didn't constantly have to restart our server, but so we're going to say I'm going to use yarn. So yarn add node mon -d. That's going to add it as a development dependency. And it should see in there. It pops in right there. Now let's add. Now we're going to need a couple things. We're going to say yarn add express. We needed that to make our server. SQlite 3. That's the database. And Knex. That's the library we're going to use, and I'll explain that. After we set up our basic server, real quick here. All right, so we got our dependencies. I got a dev dependency, a node mon. I got my dependencies there. Let's get our script up here. We're going to change our script to start. And we'll change this to node mon index.js. Save that. That means we got to create an index.js. So new file, index.js. And we're going to say const express equals require express. And remember, that's because that's what we use to basically set up our Express server, right? This should be a refresh. Now we're going to set up our server. We're going to say const server equals express. That creates a variable called server that will encapsulate all that the Express library gives us. Now remember, we had to teach Express how to use JSON. So we're going to say server.use express.json, and that teaches Express how to work with the response JSONs that we work on. So remember, we'd say res.send status, and then we would send a message as a JSON. And now let's create a port. I'll make it equal to 5,000. And now let's create a server.listen port on the port. And there's a callback. Whoops, not that. And we're going to say console.log. I'll use string interpolation, so backticks. And I'm going to give myself a new line, maybe a couple asterisks, and say server running on port, and then $. This is the string interpolation space 3 asterisks, but then maybe another new line. And on port, and I'll stick port in here. Hit save. Now let's look at our JSON. We said yarn start. Let's call this server. Save. Yarn server. So now let's spin up our server. So yarn server. And now good, we got our server running on port 5000. So now let's go back to our index. Let's write just a basic easy get, just so we can prove that we get something in a web browser. So let's just type a server.get to a home route. We have to include the homies, rec and res. And we're going to say res, we're going to return res.json in a message. I am son of Hal and am always watching. How about that? Control save. Let's go to a browser real quick. Let's go to localhost 5000. We should get that message. There we go. Our server is up and running. We are good to go as far as the server. That hopefully, all of that hopefully should have been refresher for you. If not, I went quick, but you can pause the video if you need to go back and to get caught up. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the Knex documents. Knex.js. Knex.js. Okay, so Knex.js.org. What is Knex? Knex allows us to create, databases and queries and make tables and delete tables. Anything having to do with, databases, but do it in JavaScript. And up here right here in the corner, you can kind of pick the flavor, and the documentation will change accordingly. At least it's supposed to. I know at one time it was broken, but hopefully they fixed it, where even the commands they give you are going to be in the language of, the database that you're using. So we're going to click this arrow here. Show my, whoops, let me go back. How did I get that? It doesn't even look like oh, here we go. SQlite 3. So we're going to use SQlite 3. And so here we have a query builder. We have this documentation. And there's all kinds of stuff in here. So it's pretty deep. But what we're kind of interested in is this schema builder. This tells us how to actually make tables. And the documentation is really good. It gives us the code for it, and how to make a table, how to drop a table, just all kinds of stuff. And down there, then we're going to be working with a migration. So the first thing we do is we design a table. We create a table in code, like here, like this right here. This one in the middle, this creates a users table. And this very first right here, table.increments. What this actually does is it creates a field called ID that's auto-incrementing. So if you remember in our earlier videos, we created a field called ID, and then we used that short ID to auto-generate it. Well, with this, you use this, and it'll create a field called ID, and it'll automatically keep track of what it is, and it'll automatically increment it every time you add a new record. Pretty cool. Then this creates a column called name, and then the timestamps that we talked about. This is kind of almost exactly like our lessons. We could just change this to lesson, and then a name, and then timestamps. So it's pretty cool. And it'll show you if you wanted to do this in SQL, this is the command if you wanted to do that in SQL. So this is pretty cool. I'll let you kind of peruse the documentation on your own, but we're going to go over everything that we need to do in code, and I'll explain it as I go. So the very first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create what's called a Knex file. And when I create a Knex file, what that does, let me give myself another terminal here. When I create a Knex file, that is a file that describes, the database that we want to interact with, and it describes the location of it. And so let's create that. And in order to create a Knex file, we simply type, well, first of all, let me make sure we install Knex. We did. If you didn't, then you can do a yarn add or npm add Knex. And let me just type at the command prompt, Knex. Oh, npx Knex. So you can install Knex globally if you want. Like when I installed Knex, I didn't do it globally. So if you install it globally, then you don't have to type npx in front of it anymore. You can just type Knex. But I didn't install it globally, so I'm going to always be using npx in front of it. So I just type this command, and then I'll get, let's slide this up here, and you get to see all the things that Knex gives us. So it gives us, but the ones we're mainly going to be interested in is right now we're going to use this one. We're going to say Knex and init, and this is going to give us a brand new file that's going to help for us define our tables that we want to create. So let me scroll this back down, and now let me type at the command npx Knex init, and it's going to create over here a Knex file. And so right over here we have this thing called a Knex file, and let's take a look at that. So let me shrink this down. Matter of fact is, you know what, let me move it to the right. Move panel right. That way it's over here and it's kind of out of our way. Slide this down. So the Knex file, this describes the tables and the database that we're going to use. We have a development section, a staging section, and a production section. We're not going to really be concerned with these, so I'm going to delete them for right now. Although those other ones come when you get ready to deploy your project, but we're not going to be doing that. So right now, let me just describe. This is a configuration object that describes the type of database that we're going to interact with. And then this is, when we create it, it's going to create it here. So we can give it a path here if we want. This is where we name it. I'm going to name it lessons. And SQlite databases can have this extension, or they can have the extension DB3. And that's what I like to use. I tend to prefer that. I also don't like to stick my database out in the root directory. I like to create, so let's go down here and create a new folder called data. And now that's going to be when we create it, it's going to go into that folder. And so because we created it, we're going to say right here, data/lessons.db3. And the only other thing is there's a unique thing with regards to SQlite that you all usually have to include, and there's this use null as default, and you have to set it equal to true. I won't go into big detail about it other than that it gets rid of a bunch of unique little bugs that if we don't include it, this is just concerned with SQlite databases. If you're going to use the SQlite, then use this. It just has to do with the default information, how it stores it in the background. So this is our module exports, our Knex file. We're going to save that. Hit save. And now we're ready to describe and to create our first table. And what that is it's called a migration. When you make a change to a table or create a table the first time, it's called a migration. So let me scroll back over here again and give myself some of the terminal, because this is going to be terminal stuff we're doing. And so a little bit more. So what we're going to do is we're going to have it make this database, and in order to do that, we go to the terminal and we type npx Knex migrate make, and I got to give it a name. So I'm going to call it create lessons table. And it's going to create that table and also create this as well. And so if I do that, hit enter. And so when I did that, it says using the environment development, this one right here. It's because we deleted all the other ones, so we just by default it's using that, and it created them. So everything's good. Let me shrink this back down over here. And over here, it gave us data still doesn't have anything in it, because all it did is it gave us this new folder called migrations. And in here, we have this file named the name that I named it, but with this big timestamp. And this timestamp is important because it's almost like Git in that it keeps track of changes that you make to your table structure. So let's say I am working on a table and I define it a certain way, and then someone else comes along and says, "Oh, Brett, you should have added this field extra to it, or you should not have added that table. We decided we're not going to have that table." Whatever, any kind of changes that you need to make, it's going to keep track of them in like GitHub fashion through timestamps, and then that enables you to roll back to a previous change. The only thing to kind of keep track of, or to keep in mind, is that anytime you make a change, you could potentially delete all of your data. So that's why you want to design and to test your app and your Node backend as good as possible before you actually roll it into production. So anyway, it created this table for us with a big timestamp. And so here's the file. It basically created this file here and these two functions. And so this first function is concerned with changes or the way we want to describe our table. And this is how we want to roll it back if we need to delete changes and roll it back and to undo those changes. So this is any kind of changes that we want to make to our table. For us, for the first time, we haven't even described the table, so we're going to have to define the table. And then this is how we undo any of these changes that we make up here. So let's create our first table. So we simply say return Knex.schema create table, and in here we give it a table name, lessons, and it returns a callback. And in that callback, so it creates it, and now we're going to add, now that after it creates it, now we're going to tell it the fields that we want to put in it. And this Knex schema create table is in the documentation. If we go to Schema Builder, we have create table right here. And this is just right here, and it'll describe it. So anyway, we'll go back. And in here, so we're gonna do just basically what the documentation showed on create table. We're going to create something about like this. So we're going to say we want in that table an increments field, and that's that auto ID field. We want a name field, so we say table dot, and what data type are we wanting to use for that? It's a text field, and once again you can go to the documentation and it'll tell you all the different data types that you have at your disposal to use to describe your columns. For right now, we're say we're going to call that a name. So each lesson will have a name, and we can also say how long we want that field to be. Let's just say 128. So no, a name can't be any longer than 128. And we can say we can chain onto that a constraint, for instance, like not nullable. And that's how we can give attributes to the column names that we create. We can also then put constraints under, not nullable, unique, and you can go to the documentation and see all the different types of things that you can do. We're going to create a very basic table though here. So table, and we're going to create a timestamps, and the values you pass in here are true and true. You can look at the documentation. This is going to give us two timestamp fields for originally created and time that it's modified. And then I think that's good. We'll just leave that one at that. We have to create our other table, our messages table. So we can chain right onto this thing, dot, another one of these create tables. So we're going to say create table messages, and it returns a callback after it creates that table. And now we get to describe that. We're going to give it the same thing, increments. That's its ID field for each individual message. We're going to say a sender. We're going to say what data type. We'll say that's a string type, and we'll name that column sender. We'll put some constraints on that. We'll say not nullable. And maybe for faster lookups, you can even add an index to it. That'll allow the SQlite database to embed into this field the ability to perform faster lookups if somebody's doing a search on this particular field. So it'll index it, and then we want a text field for the message, right? The body of the message. That'll be a text field, and we'll call that name. I guess we can call it text for want of a better name. We're going to say that's not nullable. You can't leave it blank. And then we're going to finally give it timestamps. Timestamps, true and true. But we also need to provide for this foreign key information, remember? So we're going to, how does this table link to this table? So we need to specify that. And in order to do that, we're going to say another field. Let's give yourself a blank line so it stands out. TBL dot integer, because an increments field is an integer. So we want this field to be of the same type as this field that we're trying to bind it to. So table integer, and this table is called lesson, and this field is going to be called ID. So we'll call that lesson ID. And if you look in the documentation, dang it, there we go, unsigned. That means it can't be a negative number. So we won't allow a user to enter a negative number or a negative number somehow to get entered. And what does it reference? It references this in this table. And so how we specify that is we'll say references, which field? ID. I know it's not intuitive. When this gets created, it will get created with the name ID. So we call it by the name that this is going to get created by when we create this table. So it references this. Let's see, let me just put a note there. ID field. That's the same right here. ID field. All right. It references the ID dot in table. Which table? Lessons. In table lessons. And now we have to describe, and now we have to give it some instructions. What if you have a bunch of messages about lesson number 4, and then lesson number 4 gets deleted? What do you do with these messages that are all about that? So you have to provide a way. You don't want that kind of information to continue to hang out down here when the original lesson that it was bound to is no longer there. So we need to specify how we want the information to sort of keep itself tidied up. And so we'll say on delete cascade. And on update, same thing. What if we change the ID or something like that? We want them to keep in sync with each other. So we always have to include on update cascade. This makes sure that two tables that are connected by a foreign key. So let me write a note here. Foreign key to lessons table. So foreign key info. And and then finally, we have to say if we need to roll back these changes, we need to tell it how to undo everything that we just did. What if we need to take away one of these fields? What if we want to add more fields? We always have to, in the second method, explain how we want to undo any changes. Knex.schema drop table if exists. Which table? Messages. And then we do the same thing again, dot drop table if exists, lessons. This will undo everything we did up above. We always have to provide a way to undo everything we did up above in case we need to perform a rollback. And so we're going to save that. And so now let's run this migration and create a table that will go in here and it'll automatically populate. And so now let's run that. And the command to actually run this migration here is npx knex migrate latest. That's the latest change that we've made. And it runs it, and look it, we have a DB3 here. And so in order to confirm, we can confirm that this was created. We can't click on it here because it's a big binary file. It's no longer JavaScript. It's no longer text. It's an actual living SQlite, database. So we can confirm that this is real. In order to do that, there is a tool called SQlite Studio. It's a free download. SQlite Studio. Let me see. Let me show you the website for that. So SQlite Studio. There we go. SQlite Studio. And you can download for your version, and it's a free download. And you download this, and then you install it. And after you install it, you can run it. And then what we're going to do is when you run it, you go up to database, add a database. We're going to go find the database we just created. Here it is, users.db. No, this isn't it, because we created a lessons. Let me see, documents. Node Express DB tutorial. Data. And here it is, lessons. We'll click open. It'll take its time. Looks like it's kind of grayed out. There it is. And I'm not going to say permanent, so I'm going to click OK. Test connection. Got a check mark. That means good. It was able to find it, connect with it. Click OK. I can double click on it over here. Look at the tables. I have a lessons table and I have a messages table. Let's just look at the table and look at the columns. ID, name, created at, update at. You can double click this. Whoops. And you can see that we have created a table, an ID. Remember that increments field? Look at it. It's called, when it gets created, it's called ID, and it's an integer, and there's a little key there showing that's a primary key. We have a name field. We have a created at and an updated at. These were the timestamps. Let's look real quickly at the messages columns. I'm going to double click, get rid of that. We have an ID for the message, the sender. We have a text with the body of the message, created at, updated at, and the lesson ID. Look at this foreign key. This connects it to this table over here. Okay, that was a lot of information. In the next video, we will continue to move forward. Try to get caught up with this. Go back, watch the video, pause it, do whatever you need to do to get set up. And of course, if you need to ask anything or need any help at all, just down in YouTube, send me a message and I will try to keep my eye on it and I will respond. I look forward to seeing you back in the next lesson when we actually now start to stick information into our new tables and watch how the information persists this time. Thank you very much.